Good morning. Thank you for watching. I'm Shakil 5858. I'm Amir. I am thankful to all news resources and my team. Following are the news which have been reported by American, European, Canadian, Australian, Asian, African channels and AFP, AP, Reuters, news agencies. Now the headlines. Allies meet at Normandy to commemorate the D-Day, the Second World War. Many Western leaders attended the ceremonies. A deadly strike in Gaza. Israeli killed more than 40 people. Attorney General under fire for defending the Justice Department. Russia and Israel continue hitting each other with missiles. Some Canadian Parliament member assisted foreign nations in Canadian affairs. Water main broke in Calgary. Human smuggling ring in Canada. Ukraine president will address French Assembly. Boeing Starliner docked in space station. Now the news in detail.
Tonight, world leaders and World War II veterans mark 80 years since D-Day. Speaking just steps from where Allied troops stormed the beaches of Normandy, President Biden warns against threats to democracy.
To bow down to dictators is simply unthinkable.
Plus, we hear from the greatest generation.
What were you fighting for? Freedom.
The CBS Evening News starts now. 80 years later, the world remembers the soldiers, sailors, and airmen of the Allied Expeditionary Force. Good evening, I'm Nora O'Donnell, and thank you for being with us. The sun rose over Normandy's cliffs this morning, just as it did on June 6, 1944, as the liberation of Western Europe began with the largest amphibious invasion in history. President Biden joined other world leaders to honor the bravery and sacrifice of the D-Day heroes. He drew a straight line from the fight for freedom in World War II to the fight against Russia's aggression now, saying freedom is worth it, democracy is worth it, the world is worth it. CBS Morning's anchor Tony DeCopel is at the American Cemetery in Normandy. Good evening, Tony.
Good evening, Nora. You know, with all World War II veterans now in their upper 90s or more, today is likely the final time that these shores will greet those veterans for a major anniversary. But if it is the last, it was also one of the biggest.
80 years after the Allied invasion of Hitler's fortress Europe, President Biden and French President Emmanuel Macron gathered to honor the thousands who died, and the free world they died for.
De la Légion d'honneur.
With Macron pinning medals on American veterans to induct them into the highest French Order of Merit, the Legion of Honor. And as war rages again on Europe's doorstep after Russia's invasion of Ukraine in 2022, President Biden linked the battle for freedom across decades.
Every generation must preserve it, defend it, and fight for it. In memory of those who fought here, died here, literally saved the world here. Let us be worthy of their sacrifice.
A sentiment shared by Secretary Antony Blinken.
One country can't simply violate the territory of another by force, try to dominate its future. If we don't stand up for those rules in our time, then we risk seeing what happened in the time that we're commemorating today.
With the soldiers of World War II now at the far end of life's journey, only about 200 American veterans made the trip to Normandy this year. Among them, Onofrio Zakari, one of the thousands of young Americans who landed at Omaha Beach, then just 21 years old. Now, at 101, he is among the dwindling few still around to tell the story.
The shells were landing all over us. One caught me in my knee and another caught me in my shoulder. I looked over, and there's this GI. He was sitting on his helmet, and he was holding his guts. He was a redhead. Never forget it.
Where did you take cover?
Didn't.
No cover.
No, we just crawled along the beach. Whenever there was a little lull, we got up and ran.
At the American Cemetery here in Normandy, 9,388 soldiers rest under white crosses and stars of David. The pride of our nation, as President Roosevelt put it back then, honored once again by their nation today.
And you were there to help start that cemetery. What did that mean to you?
They were not coming home. Not coming home. I'm lucky to be alive.
And Tony is back with us. Tony, I understand the president's got an important speech tomorrow, again talking about democracy and freedom. What can you tell us?
Yeah, Nora, he'll be just up the shore from here at Point du Hoc, a cliff where Army Rangers on D-Day fought up the sheer side as enemy fire rained down on them. And though they suffered heavy casualties, they eventually took the cliff in an act of courage in defense of democracy, and an example the White House is expected to argue of the risks of ignoring bullies abroad.
Tony DeCopel, thank you. 11 people were hospitalized for heat exhaustion today after they were rescued in a human smuggling bust in San Antonio. The city is under a heat dome with temperatures spiking into the triple digits, and the migrants were found in a trailer with no air conditioning and no access to water. CBS's Ben Tracy reports.
This is the fault of the bloodthirsty organizations that are bringing these people across and putting them in harm's way.
Police say they began following a truck pulling a trailer on the Texas side of the border near Laredo. Underneath, they say they found 26 human smuggling victims.
These people were just laying down in there, exposed to the elements.
In Bexar County, where the heat index soared to 106 degrees today, the alleged smuggling victims were brought to a wooden shack.
It's miserable conditions there, and it's just blazing hot in there.
As the heat dome expands, in Phoenix, Arizona, an expected high of 113 degrees could break the daily record.
We're going to use this rapid cooling bag.
First responders there demonstrated a potentially life-saving way to treat patients suffering from heat stroke. This cooling bag filled with ice could quickly reduce a person's body temperature.
That's our goal, is to increase the survivability by the time we get them through the doors of the hospital.
And in Las Vegas, road crews laying asphalt braved triple-digit heat.
Yeah, we're about 10 degrees hotter right now. This is more like July weather.
Now, it is expected to cool off by a couple of degrees across much of the West, including here in Las Vegas this coming weekend, but Nora, that extreme heat is back in the forecast for next week.
Very dangerous. Ben Tracy, thank you. People in 5 states are cleaning up tonight after an outbreak of suspected tornadoes, some of which came as a surprise. Just look at this monstrous supercell spinning towards homes in Maryland. And then in Michigan, a tree crashed through a home, killing a toddler and critically injuring his mom. And a suspected tornado just outside D.C. injured several people. President Biden is speaking out tonight about whether or not he would pardon his son in his federal gun case, as the jury heard from the government's key witness, the president's own daughter-in-law, Hallie Biden. CBS' Scott McFarland was inside the courtroom as she testified about Hunter Biden's drug use and the gun at the center of the case.
A star witness in a potentially pivotal piece of video evidence at the trial of President Biden's son Hunter. Hallie Biden, the widow of Hunter's brother Beau, testified this surveillance video shows her throwing away her brother-in-law's gun in a Delaware grocery store parking lot on October 23, 2018. Just 11 days after Hunter Biden bought the gun, and just after Hallie Biden said she found it in Hunter Biden's car along with drug residue and drug paraphernalia. Hallie testified, "I didn't want him to hurt himself or the kids to find it and hurt themselves. I was panicking." Prosecutors are trying to prove Hunter Biden was addicted or using drugs at the time he bought the gun, lying on this federal gun application.
Prosecutors will tell you the physical evidence doesn't lie, and this is about as powerful physical evidence as you can get, linking his possession of that gun to his use of illegal drugs.
Hallie Biden also described taking up a romantic relationship with her brother-in-law about a year after her late husband, Beau Biden's 2015 death, telling the jury it was also Hunter Biden who introduced her to using crack cocaine, calling her drug use a terrible experience. "I'm embarrassed and ashamed." Prosecutors showed Hallie Biden the gun and images of the satchel in which she found and discarded it. But Hunter Biden's attorney, Abby Lowell, tried to show Hallie Biden didn't actually know what Hunter was doing the week he bought the gun. "You don't know if he was drinking, using, or either of the above," Lowell asked. "I don't know," she responded. Hunter Biden faces the prospect of prison time if convicted on these charges. In an interview today, President Biden ruled out a future pardon for his son. Nora?
Scott McFarland, thank you. One of Donald Trump's most outspoken allies, Steve Bannon, was ordered by a federal judge to report to prison by July 1st to serve a 4-month sentence. Bannon was found to be in contempt of Congress in 2022 after failing to appear for a deposition ordered by the House January 6th committee and refusing to turn over documents. Bannon says he'll fight to appeal his conviction all the way to the Supreme Court. Bannon's former boss, Donald Trump, is in battleground Arizona tonight, firing up supporters at his first campaign event since he was convicted in the hush money case. CBS's Caitlin Huey-Burns is in Phoenix.
Donald Trump today took aim at immigration in the battleground border state key to his chances of winning the presidency.
Joe Biden wants an invasion. I want a deportation.
CBS News polling shows Trump leading Biden here, with immigration among the top issues of concern.
They assume that because we're immigrants, we are for criminality and for open borders. No, we have families. We believe in America, in a safe border.
Just this week, state Republicans approved a November ballot measure that would allow local police to arrest undocumented migrants crossing the border, a measure aimed at driving voter turnout.
My workforce is largely an immigrant workforce, and they're not criminals.
Citrus farmer Selwyn Justice says he's worried that policy could hurt business.
Somebody might just show up and come into your place of business and tell everybody they need to stop working and demonstrate documentation.
Trump lost Arizona by about 10,000 votes 4 years ago, and it has been ground zero for false claims about the election. Just last month, Trump was named an unindicted co-conspirator in an election interference case where several of his allies were charged. And as for his own conviction, Trump this week pledged retribution.
When this election is over, based on what they've done, I would have every right to go after them.
And the race to be Trump's running mate is also heating up. Several contenders have already received official vetting documents. And some of those top prospects include Governor Doug Burgum, along with Senators Tim Scott, Marco Rubio, and J.D. Vance, who was traveling with Trump here in Arizona today. Nora?
Now look at tonight's other top stories. Dozens of people, including women and children, were killed in an Israeli airstrike today on a UN school complex in central Gaza. CBS's Chris Livesay is in Tel Aviv.
Israel Defense Forces say they were targeting a compound that was housing fighters from both Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad. That compound, they said, was inside a UN school where thousands of civilians were sheltering. Israel insists it was a precision airstrike that took days of planning to avoid the loss of innocent life. In the chaotic aftermath in a hospital in Gaza, Nora, CBS News was shown children among those wounded and killed. Why is this happening to us, says this woman? May Allah avenge us.
New murder charges today for the suspected Gilgo Beach serial killer, now accused of killing 6 people on New York's Long Island, some of the murders dating back decades. CBS New York's Carolyn Gussoff was in the courtroom today as new evidence was revealed.
Rex Heuermann showed no emotion in court today, Nora, as the new charges were unveiled. Prosecutors say they connected the 60-year-old architect to the deaths of Jessica Taylor in 2003 and Sandra Castillo in 1993, partially through DNA from hair. They also described a chilling document they called a manifesto found on Heuermann's computer.
It was utilized by Heuermann to methodically blueprint and plan out his kills.
Heuermann has pleaded not guilty to all charges.
And we're getting the results of new crash tests for 3 of the nation's top-selling large SUVs. All had room to improve, but the Ford Expedition and the Chevy Tahoe earned low marks in several key safety categories, including crash protection. CBS's Chris Van Cleve explains the findings.
Nora, it was a big win for the Jeep Wagoneer in the latest round of Insurance Institute for Highway Safety testing. It scored the top safety pick ranking.
The Chevrolet Tahoe and Ford Expedition underperformed. In a front crash test, more than 90% of new vehicles have scored well on since 2021. And in new tests focused on crash protections for rear seat passengers, IIHS found all 3 showed a risk of chest injuries in a collision.
When manufacturers do not perform well in these tests, they quickly pull their engineering and design teams together, make the changes.
Ford and General Motors say they are confident in the safety of their vehicles.
Good information thanks to our CBS News teams across the globe. Eye on America is next with students and their schools' crumbling infrastructure. The average public school building in the U.S. is now nearly half a century old, which means a lot of communities are facing a lot of repairs. Congress passed a $1 trillion infrastructure package, but as CBS's Mark Strassman shows us in tonight's Eye on America, that hasn't meant instant or even timely relief for schools needing work.
So what do we got here? Right here, look at the top of ceiling tiles right here are falling down.
Baker Heights Elementary is falling apart.
This is a water fountain that is in use.
Timothy Scott's job, save the school day. Somehow patch whatever's broken.
Could you just fix this? Well, it could be fixed, it could be repaired, but we're pulling funding from the classroom.
Outside Baton Rouge, Baker, Louisiana is home to roughly 12,000 people. Money is tight. The population and tax base are shrinking. The infrastructure is crumbling. All 5 school buildings were built in the 1950s.
Typically, when you have declining enrollment, it's tough to do anything.
Superintendent J.T. Stroder met us at one of Baker's 2 shuttered schools.
Our school infrastructure is reflective of community infrastructure as a whole.
Yes, I think they are. You can drive around the community and you'll see how those kind of match. The way a student feels about their surroundings and their atmosphere affects how they perform on academically.
America's infrastructure grades are in, and the grades are bad. Overall, America's infrastructure, from roads and bridges to drinking water, get a grade of C-. And the needed investment to bring American schools up to par, $870 billion.
We're going out to the Wendy's.
Mayor Darnell Waits showed us Baker's challenges.
Everything that I do is infrastructure.
You know what the problems are, why don't you just fix them?
It takes money, and there's a lot of other things that's going on at the same time. You want infrastructure, but you want to be safe. So 50% of my budget is public safety, and everything else goes toward infrastructure.
Where's that money going to come from?
Well, you build your revenue, but basically it comes from state government and federal funding.
In 2021, Congress allocated more than $1 trillion to rebuild America's infrastructure. Louisiana Republican Senator Bill Cassidy was instrumental in negotiating that deal.
If you're talking about communities that are in genuine need of significant infrastructure help, if these communities are complaining, but the federal government has not stepped up, how would you respond?
During the COVID epidemic, billions were sent to state and local educational authorities. But oftentimes when the federal government puts up dollars, the state and local pull back, and the net sum remains constant.
To date, the infrastructure law has funded more than 40,000 projects across the country. But in many cases, the money reaches communities like Baker too slowly. In 2016, a flood closed the high school, and ever since, students have had classes in the middle school building.
I would say I do feel forgotten about, kind of ashamed, say what school you go to.
I feel mostly left out at the opportunity to be something bigger.
The water-damaged high school will reopen this fall, 8 years later.
We don't have that experience, like a bigger environment for us to grow in and flourish in, but I'm hopeful for the future.
In many American communities, that's something else America has been slow to rebuild. Hope. For Eye on America, Mark Strassman, Baker, Louisiana.
Our kids are our future. We've got to fix these problems. All right, it's history in space as Boeing's Starliner completes its maiden voyage to the International Space Station. That's next. Boeing's Starliner spacecraft successfully docked at the International Space Station today on its inaugural journey carrying 2 NASA astronauts. The astronauts will now spend about a week at the space station before returning to Earth. Heart of America is next with a World War II veteran and a love story for the ages.
This portion of the CBS Evening News is sponsored by Freshpet. It's not dog food, it's food food.
Finally, tonight's Heart of America with a special love story. 100-year-old World War II veteran Harold Terrans and 96-year-old Jean Swerlin are getting married this week in France at a chapel near where U.S. forces landed on D-Day. Terrans arrived days after Allied forces stormed the beaches of Normandy, where he helped ferry captured German soldiers back to England. The New York City natives both lived a full life before meeting 3 years ago in Boca Raton, Florida. They say they keep each other young dancing to their favorite music and holding hands like teenagers.
Being in love is not just for the young.
I'm getting married because I love this girl. She is one of the most magnificent women.
Oh, lovebirds, Harold Terrans and Jean Swerlin. They're tonight's Heart of America. Good story, right? Well, that's tonight's CBS Evening News. I'm Nora O'Donnell. Good night.
Tonight, the powerful remembrance in Normandy for those who stormed the beaches on D-Day 80 years ago. President Biden joining other world leaders to honor the band of brothers who helped turn the tide of World War II and issuing a stark warning about current threats to democracy. We're with some of those D-Day heroes for what may be their final journey back to these shores. Also tonight from Normandy, Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin, one-on-one, talking the war in Ukraine, the rising toll in Gaza, and what he told me about his health after his secret hospitalization earlier this year. The deadly tornado outbreak across multiple states, while in the West, dangerous heat. At a Trump rally in Phoenix, nearly a dozen treated for heat exhaustion. The deadly airstrike on a Gaza school, dozens killed, including children. Israel tonight calling it a precise strike. The dramatic testimony from Hunter Biden's former romantic partner and widow of his brother Beau, the new video of her throwing away Hunter's gun at the center of the case. The suspected Gilgo Beach serial killer charged with 2 more murders and the disturbing blueprint allegedly found on his computer. And the 21-gun salute honoring more than 4,000 Allied troops killed 80 years ago. The numbers that tell the story of D-Day.
This is NBC Nightly News with Lester Holt.
Good evening, I'm Amin Vaz.
And I'm Jeff Bennett. On the News Hour tonight, 80 years after the Allied invasion, world leaders converge on the beaches of Normandy to mark the anniversary of D-Day.
Dozens are killed by an Israeli strike on a United Nations school building in Gaza as ceasefire negotiations continue.
Attorney General Merrick Garland pushes back against Republican attacks on the Justice Department.
Major funding for the PBS NewsHour has been provided by
moving our economy for 160 years. BNSF, the engine that connects us.
Carnegie Corporation of New York, working to reduce political polarization through philanthropic support for education, democracy, and peace. More information at carnegie.org. And with the ongoing support of these individuals and institutions.
Welcome to the NewsHour. President Biden is in Normandy, France today to mark 80 years since the D-Day landings ushered in the bloody final chapter of World War II. But today he also pointed to the urgent threats once again raging in Europe, this time in Ukraine.
And while the specter of that brutal war haunts Europe now, it was for the hundreds of veterans of the longest day that these ceremonies were most poignant. Both Mr. Biden and French President Emmanuel Macron extolled the uncommon valor of ordinary men and women who accomplished the extraordinary some 80 years ago. Today, we are as far from D-Day as D-Day was from the height of the American Civil War. But the history made on those bluffs above the wide beaches of Normandy feels closer still. Here's Malcolm Brabant in northern France.
80 years ago, these...
Side with NewsHour West, here are the latest headlines. Communities across several states are surveying the damage from severe storms and tornadoes that swept through late Wednesday. In a suburb of Detroit, a tornado that struck without warning killed a toddler when it knocked a large tree into a bedroom. In eastern Ohio, a separate twister toppled trees and tore buildings apart. Officials there said the damage is unprecedented.
Houses that are missing their roofs, missing walls, some just complete loss. They're just laying in piles. Vehicles being moved to the yard next door, across the street. Just it is almost like a movie. You know, things that we haven't seen in this town.
And in Maryland, a driver caught the moment a twister ripped through an intersection. Those storms left a trail of destruction and injured at least 5 people. A federal judge ordered Steve Bannon to report to prison by July 1st to serve a 4-month sentence for his contempt of Congress conviction. That means the former Trump advisor could be behind bars during a large part of the run-up to the November election. Bannon said he would take the case to the Supreme Court if needed. He was convicted in 2022 for defying a subpoena from the House committee investigating the January 6th Capitol attacks. The jury in Hunter Biden's criminal trial heard testimony from Hallie Biden today. She's the widow of Hunter's late brother, Beau. Hallie and Hunter Biden were romantically involved after Beau's death, and she disposed of the gun at the heart of the case. She told jurors today about Hunter Biden's drug use as well as her own, but she said she never saw him using drugs around the time he bought the gun. Hunter Biden has pleaded not guilty to charges accusing him of failing to disclose drug use when purchasing the gun in 2018. Meantime, President Biden said in an interview with ABC News that he would not pardon his son if he's convicted. Ukrainian drones struck an oil refinery and fuel depot overnight just inside the Russian border. Kyiv has been ramping up strikes inside Russia as Russia escalates its offensive in the Kharkiv region. President Biden in that same interview with ABC News also said Ukraine's use of U.S. weapons would remain limited to defending Kharkiv, and he made it clear that attacking Moscow is off limits.
They're authorized to be used in proximity to the border. They're being used on the other side of the border to attack specific targets in Ukraine. We're not authorizing strikes 200 miles into Russia. We're not authorizing strikes on Moscow, on the Kremlin.
There's word this evening that the U.S. will send $225 million in new military aid to Ukraine. The package includes more munitions that Ukraine can use to strike inside Russia. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu will address a joint session of Congress on July 24th. Wide divisions persist on Capitol Hill over support for Israel in its war with Hamas. Independent Senator Bernie Sanders of Vermont says he will not attend the address. Voting in the European Union's parliamentary elections kicked off today. The Dutch were the first of the 27-nation bloc to cast their ballots. Exit polls suggest that the anti-immigration Party for Freedom is making large gains. Far-right movements are expected to perform well across Europe. The EU elections are the world's second biggest democratic exercise behind only India. Nearly 400 million voters will select 720 members of the European Parliament. Results will be announced on Sunday. SpaceX's Starship rocket completed its first successful test flight today. 3 prior attempts ended in explosions. The world's biggest and most powerful rocket blasted off from Texas early this morning. The hour-long flight ended with a splashdown in the Indian Ocean. NASA has ordered 2 Starships for moon landing missions planned for later this decade. SpaceX hopes to use them to transport tourists to the moon and eventually Mars. Separately, Boeing's Starliner capsule docked with the International Space Station today after a brief delay due to thruster problems. That means there are now 2 U.S.-made crewed spacecraft docked at the ISS, Boeing's Starliner and the SpaceX Dragon capsule Endeavour. Still to come on the NewsHour, the neighbor at the heart of Justice Alito's flag controversy accuses him of lying about what happened. A new book discusses the Allied invasion of Normandy through oral history. And a public artist captures time and place in his sculptures.
This is the PBS NewsHour from W.
And you can watch more brief but spectacular videos online at pbs.org/newshour/brief.
And that is the NewsHour for tonight. I'm Jeff Bennett.
And I'm Amna Navaz. On behalf of the entire NewsHour team, thank you for joining us.
Major funding for the PBS.
Years after D-Day, a poignant tribute.
Thank you for our freedom, and thank you for your service.
Honoring the thousands of Canadians who volunteered to go to war, and those who made the trip here one last time. Also on this Thursday night from Juno Beach, eternal gratitude, Canada's monumental contribution to liberating France.
We were absolutely free.
And the fears of what could happen if history is forgotten.
Here in Canada, an emergency alert for Calgary.
what's behind its major water woes, and why it's a warning to other cities. And the MPs who allegedly colluded with foreign states, why they likely would never be charged, and why Canada's public safety minister says identifying them would be irresponsible.
Global National with Donna Friesen, reporting tonight from Juno Beach in France.
As the sun sets over the beaches of Normandy, France, this June 6, 2024, it is calm and peaceful, exactly what Allied forces, including Canadians, fought and died for here 80 years ago. Good evening, and thanks for joining us. What took place here changed the course of history, liberating Western Europe from Nazi domination, fighting for the freedoms we still cherish. And this may be doorstep. This ceremony took place on Omaha Beach, where American forces landed.
Pleasure to meet you, sir.
Some of the veterans who were able to make the trip back to these once blood-stained shores were awarded France's highest honor.
Nous vous faisons chevalier de la Légion d'honneur. We thank all the veterans being present here, and I just want to express the gratitude of the French people.
Russia was an ally 80 years ago. This year, the Russian president was not invited. Instead, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky was there, a man who knows what it means to defend a nation against aggression, something U.S. President Joe Biden acknowledged at an earlier ceremony.
We know the dark forces that these heroes fought against 80 years ago. They never fade. We see one stark example. Ukraine has been invaded by a tyrant.
King Charles also spoke today about the duty to remember the bravery of soldiers who replaced tyranny with freedom.
Very many of them never came home. It is with the most profound sense of gratitude that we remember them.
Being here in Normandy really brings the enormity of D-Day home, what was gained and who was lost. The military strategy is well known now, but what gets discussed less often is why the young men fought. 14,000 Canadians who were part of the Normandy invasion were all volunteers. They weren't conscripted. They chose to go to war. This is why William Wilson wanted to come back to Normandy one last time, to memories alive. But first, Farah Nasser has the rest of the day's news. Farah.
Thanks, Donna. There are growing calls for the federal government to release names and details after an intelligence watchdog said some members of parliament wittingly assisted efforts of foreign states to meddle in Canadian politics. David Aiken reports.
This is about as serious as it gets, that we have members of parliament working for hostile foreign states. You won't release the names.
Conservative MPs were doing their best to convince Public Safety Minister Dominic LeBlanc to divulge the names of elected officials that a watchdog all-party committee of MPs said wittingly colluded. Laws on colluding with foreign governments would make it almost impossible to charge them. Farah.
David Aiken in Ottawa. Thank you, David. Calgary's issued a critical water supply alert after the largest water main break in recent memory caused city water levels to drop dangerously low. As Heather Yorks West explains, experts say this should serve as a wake-up call for communities across the country.
The alarm went off just after 6:30, waking up many Calgarians with an ask to skip the morning shower, the city facing a critical water supply alert.
I know this is an inconvenience, but I can't overstate the importance of this request. We have a need to urgently ensure that our water supply does not get dangerously low.
This is why a massive water main break Wednesday night, flooding parts of the Trans-Canada Highway. By morning, the full extent of the break's impact became clear.
The break is on one of our critical pipes. It's called the feeder main, and it enables us to move water across the city.
The city says its priority is making sure there is enough water in the event of an emergency. A citywide fire ban is in effect as well.
We've known for a while that our infrastructure investments in the water sector have not kept pace with needs.
Those who study Canada's water systems say the emergency in Calgary should alert other municipalities of potential danger ahead as infrastructure continues to age.
So for example, between 2017 and 2021 across the prairies, investments were short about $3 billion.
The city is calling this a complicated repair and asking residents to be patient, warning water restrictions could be in place for some time. Farah?
Heather Yorks West in Calgary. Thanks, Heather. A suspected human smuggling ring. Coming up in new arrests in an RCMP investigation dating back more than a year.
अस्सलाम वालेकुम दोस्तों, हर किसी के कोई ना कोई फाइनेंशियल गोल्स होते हैं जिसके लिए सेविंग करना बहुत ज़रूरी है।
In Ontario, RCMP announced 8 suspects are facing charges related to a suspected human smuggling ring involving more than 100 migrants.
For a little over a year, investigators delved into the inner workings of a complex and well-organized human smuggling network that consisted of dozens of people across a number of jurisdictions.
Paying them thousands of dollars to cross the Canada-US border using the St. Lawrence River. The group is linked to the deaths of 8 migrants, including 2 children last spring. They died after their boat capsized on the river. A report out today on how the RCMP handled the 2022 mass killing and manhunt on Saskatchewan First Nation and neighboring communities says there were communication issues, but nothing that significantly affected the outcome. The report does provide areas for improvement. The team identified 36 recommendations to be considered, ways that we, as a police service, can improve our operations. The recommendations include more community outreach, The team identified 36 recommendations to be considered, ways that we, as a police service, can improve our operations. The recommendations include more community outreach, better command structures, and equipment upgrades. In September 2022, Miles Sanderson killed 11 people and injured 17 others on the James Smith Cree Nation in nearby community of Weldon. He was arrested 3 days later and died of a cocaine overdose while in police custody. More grief in Gaza. Still ahead, the deadly Israeli strike on a school where thousands were sheltering.
In Gaza, dozens of people are dead after Israeli planes hit a packed UN school where thousands of people were taking shelter and sleeping. Israel claims it was targeting Hamas militants, and as Jackson Prosco reports, the attack is hampering efforts to reach a ceasefire.
Horror rained down from the sky in central Gaza as an Israeli airstrike hit a school where up to 6,000 people were sheltering, according to the United Nations Agency for Palestinian Refugees. We were sleeping when we suddenly saw a rocket falling on us, says this witness. Palestinian authorities say at least 40 people were killed, including children.
It's just another horrific example of the price that civilians are paying.
The IDF confirms it carried out the strike, but said it was not aware of civilian casualties. The Israelis claim they were targeting a Hamas compound operating inside the school and accuse Hamas of deliberately using UN facilities.
This war needs to end. Too many people are dying. There is too much suffering.
This latest strike has surely complicated efforts to end the conflict. A U.S.-backed ceasefire fighting for total victory despite international pressure. Jackson Prosco, Global News, Washington.
Next, how Normandy is remembering Canadian veterans for their courage and sacrifice on D-Day. And today in Moncton, people gather to honor and remember the role soldiers, especially those from Atlantic Canada, played on D-Day. Donna will be back from Normandy next.
Welcome back to Normandy. Even after 80 years, you can feel the gratitude here. People in Normandy have not forgotten the significance of what Canadian and Allied forces did for them, of what it was like to be liberated. In Normandy, France, they are not shy about showing their gratitude to Canada. And among the guests at the ceremony at Juno Beach were 850 Canadian high school students. They've been part of a group traveling across Europe, learning about Canada's contribution and sacrifice in the Second World War.
Coming here has definitely taught me a lot about, the history of it.
After the ceremony, they walked along a stretch of Juno Beach.
It's unbelievable to walk on the beaches where it all happened.
A powerful place to reflect on the past and think about the kind of future they want to build. That is Global National for this Thursday, June 6th. I'm Donna Friesen. Thanks for watching.
No. Oh, you're the savior of the people.
Incredible moment between Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky and an American World War II veteran on this D-Day. Earlier, President Biden stood here in Normandy and told the world, quote, "We will not walk away from Ukraine." Short time ago, I spoke with John Kirby, White House National Security Communications Advisor, about America's future role in this war. Watch. John, thank you very much for joining me.
Good to be with you.
It's good to be with you. We just listened to President Biden's speech. He spoke forcefully about defending democracy, about turning back tyranny. He said, when we are asked, and is it our turn, we will say yes, something to that effect. There will be people who look at the Ukraine decisions and say that that language is positive. It sounds reassuring to them and to Europe, but that the advances in military weaponry have been too slow, and that this latest accession to fire within Russia around Kharkiv is too limited, too confining. What do you say to that?
Well, I would remind people that we have evolved our support to Ukraine as the war has evolved. The needs of the Ukrainians on the battlefield have changed, and they are still changing, and we are trying to stay apace with that. That's why we're in constant conversations with them. I would also, want to remind people that everything Ukraine is getting is in concert with them and meeting their needs, their asks, and we're trying to, again, stay apace of that. But I think it's also, the last thing I'll say, and then I promise I'll end the answer, is take a look at what Russia has suffered. And the president alluded to some of this in his speech. More than 350,000 casualties. A million young people leaving the country because they don't want to be there anymore. An economy that's basically a war economy and not doing that well. Russia has suffered a lot at the hands of Ukraine, and because they have invested so much of their energy and effort into this war. Mm-hmm. And not just the United States, but 50 some odd nations can take some credit for that, because we helped arm and help train and help resource the Ukrainian soldiers that are fighting so bravely.
So are you telling me that the president believes that Russia is on its heels? They just opened 3 new offensives in the north and east in Ukraine. Does the president believe that Russia is going to collapse on its own?
Oh, no, I wouldn't go that far.
In this effort?
I wouldn't go that far right now, but I do think it's important to remember they haven't made much progress. For all the effort and the ballyhooing about what they were doing or trying to do at Kharkiv, they basically stalled out. Once they hit the first line of Ukrainian defenses, that was kind of it. And now they're reassessing, we think, about what they might do next. So they still can be within range of Kharkiv. I don't want to diminish that. That's why we're giving the Ukrainians permission to strike across border at imminent threats. But they have largely stalled out. And Mr. Putin has achieved none of his strategic objectives.
Okay, so we know that Ukraine is suffering in a number of places along that border right now. When Zelensky meets with President Biden tomorrow, I believe they're going to talk. Right, tomorrow. And he says, okay, thanks for letting me go deeper into Russian territory around Kharkiv, but I also really need to do it in Avdiivka or wherever else he feels he needs to do it. How do you say no to what he's asking for in those places? And why would you, if he's committed, as he just said, to peace, which means zero occupation from Russia inside of Ukraine?
Well, we haven't had those conversations with the Ukrainians, and we'll see where it goes tomorrow. The president's looking forward to another chat with President Zelensky. The immediate need right now was Kharkiv, because the Russians were pushing in, trying to establish a buffer zone on the Ukrainian side of the border so that they could hit Kharkiv, because they want to get Kharkiv. That's what the need is right now. We will, as I said to my first answer to you, we'll keep in touch with the Ukrainians nearly every day, and if we have to make adjustments, we'll make adjustments.
So the Wall Street Journal wrote a piece about this, and they said that this is a message to Putin: just back up a little bit, and we'll leave you alone. Get off that border area. You back up a little bit. We're not going to allow Ukraine to use ATACMS that go deeper into your territory. Do you agree with that?
No, I don't at all.
So will we let them use ATACMS?
Right now, there's no change in our policy about the use of ATACMS, a long-range strike missile of 300 kilometers or so for use inside Russia. And again, I want to remind, the guidance we've given the Ukrainians is to go after things that are an imminent threat just over that border. Again, will we have to talk to them about what that looks like going forward? Probably so, but that's the guidance they've been given right now. I think it's really important, too, to remember, I mean, you heard Putin talk about this just yesterday in a press conference. We're dealing with a nuclear-armed power, and I think we can all agree, especially people that love Ukraine and want to see Ukraine succeed, that an escalation of this conflict, to really become potentially World War III, to become the U.S. versus Russia, which Putin already thinks it is, could be not only disastrous for the Ukrainian people, but disastrous for people all across Europe.
You know, so I guess it's a question. We're sitting here at the Normandy American Cemetery, which of course makes everyone think of World War II. When Roosevelt allowed Lend-Lease, and we sent ships, then we sent ammunition, we didn't put any constraints on that. We didn't say you can use the bullets in this place, but not in that place. You can use the ships this way, but not that way. We said win. Do what it takes to win with our help. So why don't we have that same, isn't the threat enough from Russia in a larger sense to make winning the goal?
Well, there are parallels, certainly, to what's going on the continent of Europe now, to what happened in the 1940s and World War II. They are not exactly the same situation. I mean, this is Russia invaded a peaceful nation next door in a completely unprovoked and illegal way.
Didn't Hitler do the same thing?
And we are aiding, and we have been aiding Ukraine in terms of beating back that aggression and defending their sovereign territory and their territorial integrity. And we're going to keep doing that.
Well, let's take the parallel a little bit further because, Hitler invaded the Sudetenland. He's claimed it was the German-speaking area, that they wanted to be part of Germany. Putin has claimed the same thing about Donetsk and Luhansk. These are essentially Russia, he says. Chamberlain, in the Munich Agreement, I believe him. I think that's really all he wants. I think after that, he's going to sit back. Why shouldn't we learn from history about what Putin's designs are to go further if he believes that President Biden will only give this here and that there and not give them what they need?
No, I think the president talked about this quite clearly in his speech today, and he'll have more to say about this tomorrow at Point du Hoc. We have to stand up to aggressors. You can't let them just change borders by force. And we have done that. And it's not just the United States. 50 some other nations have helped Ukraine try to beat back this aggression. And you're right about Donetsk and Luhansk and Crimea. That is Ukrainian soil, and they have every right to claim that soil back. It's their country, and we want to make sure they have the tools to do that and the skills to do that, and we're going to continue to provide that kind of support.
So then President Biden agrees within 1991 Ukraine territory.
Of course.
So the United States plans to back them with whatever they need to achieve that goal. In what kind of time frame?
We have been doing that for the last 2+ years, giving them what they need. As the war has changed, our support has changed. How long is that going to go on? Geez, Martha, I don't know anybody can know the answer to that. As you know, there's a peace summit coming up in Switzerland here in a couple of weeks. The vice president will be representing the United States.
We have represented.
We've been represented at every single peace summit. The president believes that we're doing it again here with some serious representation by the vice president.
Is he going to be at a fundraiser in California during that?
The president has other things on his schedule, but nobody can say, looking at what we've done for Ukraine in the last couple of years, that President Biden isn't standing absolutely shoulder to shoulder with Ukrainians as they continue to fight for their freedom.
One more question. I've spoken to a number of World War II veterans here, and I've asked them if Kirby, thank you. It's great to see you in person, and always good to have sit down and talk with you.
It's great to be here with you, especially on this special anniversary at this incredibly sacred place.
We're all very fortunate to be here to honor you.
Yes, we are.
John, thank you very much.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Hey, Sean Hannity here. Hey, click here to subscribe to Fox News.
Welcome back. Our top story. A deal has been made between the TTC union and the putting a strike on hold. Let's check back in with CTV's Beth McDonnell, who is at the Sheridan Center, where union members are set to speak tonight. Beth?
For many, Sean, this will be considered good news to hold off the TTC from going on strike. ATU Local 113 releasing.
Welcome back. Our top story. A deal has been made between the TTC union and the putting a strike on hold. Let's check back in with CTV's Beth McDonnell, who is at the Sheridan Center, where union members are set to speak tonight. Beth?
For many, Sean, this will be considered good news to hold off the TTC from going on strike. ATU Local 113 releasing a statement just a few minutes ago saying that we will continue to work through details to arrive at a fair and reasonable contract that we can recommend to our members to ratify. They say their demands have been reasonable, and they ask the TTC for assurance on job security, for protections on contracting out their jobs, as well as improvements and benefits for active members and pensioners. And everyone with the union here is here right now, and we're going to hear what they have to say.
We do have a framework to a deal right now, but I can tell you it was a hard road to get here, and our membership deserves a contract that respects their opportunities, protects their future, but at the same time we need to call out, we shouldn't have to deal with all the shenanigans being done by the employer to get here. We're here negotiating and bargaining in good faith, and at times we feel let down by the way the TTC conducts itself in bargaining. We'll work through that. We'll make sure that we flesh out the deal that protects our members' rights, but at the same time we do have something to take to our members, a framework to take to our members to hopefully get a deal.
Can you give us more specifics? Why the hold? Why not a full deal tonight? Why is there still this hiccup?
Well, the only hiccups that we can say are on the TTC side. We're here ready in order to have a deal, in order to protect our members' rights. We've been through a hard day. We've worked very hard throughout the day, waiting for the TTC to finally step up. We have a framework of a deal. We're working on the gaps that can possibly be addressed in order to protect our members. And if they're not, then we'll be having a different conversation with the TTC.
Are you going to use the provincial mediator?
We don't have a need for the mediator at this time, but like I said, we have a framework for a deal to take to our members, addressing a number of our concerns, including job security, wages, benefits, not just benefits for our active members, benefits for our pensioners as well. We'll take that to our membership. We'll flesh out this deal, make sure it's something that's comprehensive that we can be proud of, and take to the membership to hopefully ratify.
Give us a timeline. When do riders need to pay attention? What are the dates ahead that people need to know about?
Well, keep your eyes and ears open for the next couple of days, but I can tell you right now, we'll work through it and hopefully we have a deal that we can hopefully be ratified. So we'll be in touch with the media, making sure that everyone's kept informed, and that also our members and the riding public should be aware.
Marvin, something seemed to turn earlier tonight. There was a statement by our 6 p.m. that said there had been no progress, and then that switched. What happened?
Well, as I've been saying throughout this whole process, we've had fragments of the deal, opportunities that had strings attached, and finally some of those obstructions were alleviated. But at the same time, it's not that we don't trust the employer, it's that we don't trust the employer. That we have a situation where the TTC will say one thing, and then whomever they take it to, whichever advisors they may have, be it from, I don't know, the province or other executives, that seem to get in the way and obstruct the deal happening. We've always been at the table authentically trying to get a deal, but at the same time, whenever we have any sort of advancement, they do other takeaways and other things to obstruct the deal. That is the problem dealing with this employer. Sometimes we have an opportunity to get a deal done, but they look for ways in order to interfere with that and have us, only get cents on the dollar for what we're entitled to get. That's what I was talking about. The culture needs to change. This is a situation of the frustration pent up for years with this employer, that we put up with it for so long. We're equipped with tools now to get equality at the bargaining table, and this is an example that we're frustrated, and if we need to, we'll act, and if that's what it takes to have a strike to get our rights, entertained, we'll do it.
Tonight from Normandy, a special edition of World News Tonight, honoring our heroes, the World War II veterans who stormed the beaches of Normandy 80 years ago today. Tonight, my exclusive interview with President Biden. What the president said here today about the bravery of thousands of American sons who stormed the beaches here 80 years ago, and the fight for freedom and democracy, even today. Our moment with the President and First Lady at the Normandy American Cemetery. And the President tonight on the other news. Ukraine, the U.S. authorizing the use of American weapons to strike inside Russia. The President reacting tonight to Vladimir Putin's new warning. Back home, immigration closing the U.S.-Mexico border. The President's executive action. I asked the President why he didn't do this sooner. The President on Donald Trump's guilty verdict. How big of a role does he think it should play in the election? And we ask about his own son, Hunter Biden, and his trial. We ask, would the President pardon his son? Also here in Normandy tonight, the American veterans returning. We told them we would meet them at Utah Beach, where we witnessed today the crowd of strangers growing, then the applause for the American heroes, the gratitude here for their sacrifice. And the remarkable moment here between President Zelensky and an American veteran. What that veteran said to President Zelensky, what Ukraine's leader said back. The other news back in the U.S. tonight, severe storms up and down the East Coast, Washington, D.C., Philadelphia, and New York City, and more than 22 reported tornadoes, multiple states, and they turned deadly tonight. The major headline in the Israel-Hamas war tonight, UN officials now saying dozens are dead after an Israeli airstrike hit a school in central Gaza. What we're learning.
From ABC News, this is ABC World News Tonight.
This news is funded by viewers like you. Please support our work at democracynow.org/give. Welcome to Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. In Gaza, an Israeli attack on an UNRWA school and shelter has killed at least 40 Palestinians overnight, including 14 children in the Nusayrat refugee camp. Dozens of people were injured in the attack. The school was being used to house displaced Palestinians. One survivor said he'd sought refuge at the school after being displaced first from Gaza City, then Khan Yunis, and then Rafah. Survivors described the school as being shelled with a belt of fire.
We were sleeping when we suddenly saw a rocket falling on us. On the second floor, there were martyrs, and on the first floor, they were injured. That's all we saw. Only God can help us. I was asleep when I found myself covered in rubble. The rocket hit. It came through the second floor. We came out to help people and the martyrs.
An Al Jazeera reporter at the scene said a number of women, children, and the elderly were among the victims. Israel claimed members of Hamas were at the UN school, but provided no evidence to back this up. In other news from Gaza, the UN Food Agency has issued a dire warning stating, quote, over 1 million people, half the population of Gaza, are expected to face death and starvation by mid-July, unquote, if Israel's war on Gaza does not end. The warning comes in a new report on global hunger that also says the risk of starvation persists in Sudan, Haiti, Mali, and South Sudan. Meanwhile, UNICEF says 90% of children in Gaza lack the nutrition needed for proper growth. Karen Hester, a medical advisor with Doctors Without Borders in Gaza, said there's been a, quote, insane escalation of hostilities across the Gaza Strip over the last 2 days.
We have seen hospitals being bombed, we have seen refugee camps being bombed, we have seen humanitarian warehouses being bombed. The situation is apocalyptic. The emergency room was completely packed. There were families screaming. There was a man screaming for his family that had died.
In occupied East Jerusalem, mobs of far-right Israelis attacked Palestinians and several journalists, including Saif al-Kawasmi, on Wednesday during the Jerusalem Day flag march to mark the anniversary of Israel's seizing of East Jerusalem, the West Bank, and Gaza in 1967. In Palestine's site, some prisoners had limbs amputated due to injuries sustained from constant tight handcuffing. Spain's announced plans to join South Africa's genocide case against Israel at the International Court of Justice. Spain joins other countries, including Colombia, Mexico, Egypt, Turkey, who have requested to join South Africa's case. Meanwhile, President Biden and leaders of 16 other nations have just issued a joint statement supporting the ceasefire and hostage deal that Biden outlined last week. In California, Stanford University says it's suspending 13 students who were arrested Wednesday after they briefly occupied the office of the president. The student activists are accused of injuring a law enforcement officer and causing extensive damage to Stanford property. Students are demanding Stanford disclose and divest their investments in Israel. Here in New York, UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres gave a major speech on the climate crisis Wednesday, as data confirmed last month was the hottest May on record, putting the Earth on a 12-month streak of record-breaking temperatures. Speaking at the American Museum of Natural History, Guterres said the world, quote, needs an exit ramp off the highway to climate hell, and called for a global ban on fossil fuel advertising.
We must directly confront those in the fossil fuel industry. We have shown relentless zeal for obstructing progress over there.
Levels for at least one of the next 5 years. But Guterres says that the world can still meet the 1.5-degree target if governments drastically speed up the phase-out of fossil fuels. In Ecuador, indigenous and environmental activists demonstrated against state-run oil company Petroecuador Wednesday after it failed to comply with a court order to shut down gas flares in the Amazon. The flares burn off gas created during oil production. This is indigenous activist Nancy Pelatuña.
There's groups that are at the brink of extermination, polluted rivers and polluted water sources.
Corporations cannot misuse the judicial system to criminalize human rights defenders, unquote. The European Union election is kicking off as voters in the 27-member nation select its new parliament between today and Sunday. Immigrant rights advocates fear expected gains from the far right could worsen the situation for asylum seekers, thousands of whom attempt the treacherous journey to Europe each month via the Mediterranean Sea. Also at the top of voters' concerns are the climate emergency and the economy. In media news, the New York Times has revealed the new chief executive of the Washington Post, Will Lewis, clashed with the paper's executive editor, Sally Busby, last month over her decision to publish an article about his connection to a major phone hacking scandal at Rupert Murdoch's News of the World newspaper in Britain. Busby resigned from the paper on Sunday, weeks after the clash. The New York Times reports other factors in her resignation included a plan by Lewis to reorganize the Washington Post newsroom and essentially demote her. Politico has described Lewis's new plan for the paper as the Rupert Murdochization of the Washington Post. In Arizona, rights groups are condemning Republican lawmakers for voting to place an anti-immigrant initiative on the November ballot. If passed, the measure would allow local law enforcement to arrest people suspected of crossing the border without authorization and empower state judges to order deportations. The group Lucha Arizona is suing the state over the proposal. Democratic State Representative Annalise Ortiz spoke out on the Arizona House floor earlier this week.
Under HCR 2060, my brown skin could be the cause for an Arizona police officer to pull me over, arrest, and detain me on suspicion that I don't belong in the state where I was born and raised. My community has lived in fear under SB 1070, and the provisions in HCR 2060 will instill that same fear, especially for our children who have parents who are undocumented.
And Senate Republicans voted down a bill that would establish federal protections for access to contraception. Republican Senators Susan Collins and Lisa Murkowski backed the measure alongside Democrats, but the 51-39 vote fell short of the 60 votes needed to overcome a filibuster. And those are some of the headlines. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report.
To one of our newsletters. Stay in the know with ABC News.
Today, after weeks of scrutiny, the Immigration Minister issues a new directive on the deportation of non-citizens convicted of serious crimes.
The revised direction makes it clear that the safety of the Australian community is the Albanese government's highest priority.
Communities prepare to evacuate after heavy rain drenches southern New South Wales. Gazan health officials report that dozens of displaced Palestinians have been killed at a UN-run school targeted in an Israeli airstrike. British broadcaster Michael Mosley disappears on holiday in Greece, triggering a major search. And the winner of the Archibald Prize announced for a portrait of author Tim Winton. Hello and welcome to ABC News. I'm Ruby Cornish. Immigration Minister Andrew Giles has signed a new ministerial direction for officials and tribunals considering cancelling the visas of foreign nationals convicted of serious crimes. Political reporter Evelyn Manfield has more from Parliament House.
The existing Direction 99 has been quite controversial because it required officials like those on the Administrative Appeals Tribunal, when considering cases of visa cancel, of not making enough of a change in this new direction.
All right, Evelyn Manfield at Canberra's Parliament House Bureau for us. Thank you. More than 60 flood rescues have been carried out in New South Wales as heavy rain falls in the Illawarra and Shoalhaven regions. The Warragamba Dam and other Sydney dams are spilling. Further south, Currarong and Vincentia have had more than 330 millimetres of rain in 2 days. Suburbs in Wollongong have also been swamped. Cringilla recorded more than 200 millimetres and almost 150 mils fell in Wollongong's CBD. Authorities say conditions are expected to ease this afternoon.
We're expecting rain conditions and flash flooding to ease as the day progresses. Hopefully it's a pretty clear weekend.
So that rain is dialling right back.
Angus Hines from the Bureau of Meteorology. As always, appreciate the update. Nine Chairman Peter Costello has rejected suggestions he assaulted a journalist at a Canberra airport yesterday afternoon. Footage posted by The Australian shows reporter Liam Mendes approaching Mr Costello to ask him about a harassment scandal at Nine. The pair collide, which causes Mr Mendes to fall. At Parliament House, Mr Costello denied assaulting him.
No assaulting. As I said before, he was backing backwards. He hit an advertising placard. I did not lay a finger or a fist or anything else on him.
The operators of Adelaide's casino will have to pay $67 million in a money laundering case brought on by the Financial Crimes Agency. Reporter Brianna Fiore joins us now from Adelaide. Brianna, what can you tell us about the decision?
Well, the order has been handed down today by the Federal Court, and it's instructing Adelaide Sky City to pay $67 million, included increasing the fines from $100,000 to $75 million.
Brianna Fiore, thank you. Around half of all women working in retail and a quarter of men have reportedly been sexually harassed at work. Retail staff who took part in a Sydney University study reported customers as the offenders in more than a third of the cases. Business reporter Nadia Daly has been following the story.
It's really shocking to hear, but maybe not surprising for those who work in the sector. And retail workers in the study reported that sexual harassment was basically a part of their daily work. It was that common and that pervasive within the industry. So I spoke to workers like Hannah, who's a young woman, and she...
Leave it there, Nadia Daly. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Health officials in Gaza say dozens of displaced Palestinians have been killed in an Israeli airstrike on a school operated by the United Nations. The UN says the facility in central Gaza was sheltering 6,000 people at the time, with no classes running due to the ongoing war. According to the Hamas-run health ministry, at least 40 people were killed, including women and children, while dozens more have been injured. The United Nations is calling the attack horrific and tragic.
It's just another horrific example of the price that civilians are paying, that Palestinian men, women and children who are at the moment.
Yeah, you paint a very bleak picture indeed. Global Affairs editor John Lyons will leave it there. Thank you.
Thank you.
British TV personality Michael Mosley, who's known for popularising the 5-2 diet, has gone missing while on holiday in Greece. The 67-year-old was last seen as he set off on a walk while on a holiday on the island of Symi. Police, firefighters and volunteers are taking part in a search and rescue operation.
As news filtered through the Greek island of Symi, locals shared this recent picture of Michael Mosley appealing for help to find him. The well-known broadcaster disappeared while walking on this idyllic island yesterday. The island is now the focus of a search and rescue operation. A helicopter from Athens than 24 hours since Michael Mosley vanished. For his family and friends, the wait for news must be unbearable.
New figures from the Australian Bureau of Statistics show the total number of building dwelling approvals fell in April. Just last month, the federal government pledged $9.3 billion to the states and territories over the next 5 years to achieve its new national housing target. For more on this, we are joined by Professor of Urban and Regional Planning at the University of Sydney, Nicole Gurin. Nicole, welcome to the program.
Thanks very much.
So the total number of dwellings approved in April fell by 0.3% compared to the month before. That doesn't...
Some aside for people who are no longer able to, keep up with rents and meet the high deposit gap now to get into first home ownership.
Professor of Urban and Regional Planning at the University of Sydney, Nicole Gurin, thank you for your time today.
Thanks very much.
The 24th Adelaide Cabaret Festival kicks off tonight with world-class singers, storytellers and performers. Bethany Alderson has more from Adelaide.
The world of cabaret has once again descended on South Australia with the return of the Adelaide Cabaret Festival, which officially kicks off here tonight. Held at the Adelaide Festival Centre, it's claimed to be the world's biggest cabaret festival, and this year it's under the artistic direction of Australian actress and performer Virginia Gay. She'll be hosting tonight's sold-out variety gala and will also herself be for the next 12 days.
Bethany Alderson there. Let's take a quick look now at the national weather. A sunny day in Brisbane today, showers easing in Sydney, rain forecast for Canberra, partly cloudy in Melbourne and Hobart, a cloudy day in Adelaide and Perth, and sunny in Darwin with a top of 29 degrees. And a reminder that you can keep up to date at news.abc.net.au and, of course, on ABC iView. Here are the top stories on the ABC News channel this hour. Immigration Minister Andrew Giles has issued a new directive to make it clearer that non-citizens convicted of serious crimes...
I'm Rochelle Harrison-Pless in Sydney. Whether it's an environmental story, business feature or breaking news, I report on the stories that matter from across Australia and New Zealand here on France 24.
Rochelle Harrison-Pless, one of the 200 France 24 correspondents around the world.
World leaders commemorate the 80th anniversary of D-Day, which led to the end of World War II. And with war once again on Europe's doorstep, France's Emmanuel Macron says he'll supply Ukraine with warplanes to defend against Russia's war of aggression. Cuba moves to ease concerns over the imminent arrival of 4 Russian warships ahead of joint naval exercises along with Venezuela. Havana says the ships will not have nuclear weapons aboard and do not pose a threat. And the United Nations has condemned an Israeli strike on a former UN school in central Gaza that killed at least 35 people, according to reports. Israel's military said it carried out a precision strike on a Hamas compound. The EU has called for an independent investigation. Good evening to you wherever you're watching. Thanks for joining us here on France 24. First up, world leaders and veterans of World War II have gathered in northern France to mark the 80th anniversary of the D-Day landings. On the 6th of June 1944, over 150,000 Allied soldiers landed on the beaches of Normandy, an operation that eventually led to the end of war in Europe. France's Emmanuel Macron paid tribute to the fallen and the survivors. US President Joe Biden praised the courage of the troops and said democracy would always prevail, as he drew parallels between the Nazi occupation of Europe and Russia's war in Ukraine. Kemi Knight looks back over this first of 3 days of commemorations in Normandy.
A new generation of leaders lines up on Omaha Beach, Nazi Germany, and the threats facing Western democracies today. And Biden pointed to the fact it may be the last ceremony with living veterans, which he said should inspire Americans to continue their fight against tyranny.
Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky received a long-standing ovation from those gathered at Omaha Beach, while Russia, a crucial World War II ally, was not invited to the D-Day commemorations. Emmanuel Macron pledged the West's unwavering support for Kiev and said France would send Mirage fighter jets to Ukraine and begin training Ukrainian pilots to fly them before the end of the year.
Nous allons lancer une nouvelle coopération.
We will launch a new cooperation and announce the transfer of Mirage 2000-5 fighters, train them, and provide them with the ammunition and weapons they need to defend their territory.
Qui leur permettra de défendre leur sol.
Next up, Cuba has moved to ease concerns ahead of the arrival of 4 Russian warships in Havana next week. The ships, including a submarine, are to carry out exercises along with Cuba and Venezuela's navies. Havana said the ships will not have any nuclear weapons on board and that they pose no threat to the region. The US said it would be monitoring the exercises. Our Havana correspondent Ed Augustin tells us Cuba's reasons for joining in.
I think the backdrop of this is Cuba's huge economic crisis and its increasing inability to keep the lights on. I'm speaking to you from Havana, where we're privileged. We've only had 4 hours of power cuts today. Cuba wants to ratchet up and telegraph its nuisance value that it's historically been very good at doing.
Next up, our new world war. That's how France's Prime Minister has described Russian interference in other countries' affairs. Gabriel Attal said Moscow's meddling was a poison that seeks to manipulate opinion. This comes days after French authorities opened an investigation into a suspected terror plot, a Russian-Ukrainian national arrested at Charles de Gaulle airport after he injured himself while manipulating explosives. Caroline Loyer explains.
It's behind these walls, in this hotel, near the Paris Charles de Gaulle airport, that the man injured himself on Monday evening. Suffering serious burns on his head and hands, he was taken to hospital. But in his room, a big surprise awaited the investigators.
Initial findings led to the discovery of products and materials intended to manufacture explosive devices.
A small amount of ammonium nitrate was found, as worry about possible Russian sabotage on their territory. In Germany and Estonia in particular, recent acts of vandalism could have been ordered by Moscow.
A French academic has been arrested in Moscow on suspicion of gathering information on Russian military activities. The man is a researcher specializing in Russia and Central Asia who works as a consultant for a Swiss conflict management organization. France 24's Siobhan Silk tells us more.
A flash of a badge, then 2 masked officers approach the person sitting on a Moscow cafe terrace. They put him in a van, which then heads to the Investigative Committee of Russia, the agency with jurisdiction over serious crimes, and which released this video. The man taken in is a French citizen, Laurent Venatier, a researcher specialising in international relations and Eurasia. At first, authorities said Venatier was suspected of gathering information on Russian military activities, which could be used against the security of the state. But then it said the Frenchman, who works for a Geneva-based NGO, the Centre for Humanitarian Dialogue, was being charged with violating for the Olympic Games next month.
The United Nations has condemned an Israeli strike on a former UN school in central Gaza that killed at least 35 people, mainly women and children, according to reports. The UN's Palestinian relief agency, UNRWA, said the facility at the Nusayrat refugee camp was housing some 6,000 displaced people. Israel's military said it had carried out a precision strike on a Hamas compound. The EU's top diplomat has called for an independent investigation. Earlier, we heard from Tommaso Della Longa, spokesman for the International Federation of the Red Cross and Red Crescent.
We received a few information from colleagues of Palestine Red Crescent. They arrived there by the time is just adding a pressure on a system that is really overwhelmed.
Jordan is to host an emergency international conference on the urgent humanitarian response to the crisis in Gaza as the war enters its 9th month this Friday. The conference is to be held on the 11th of June, co-hosted with Egypt and the United Nations. Martin Griffiths, the UN's Undersecretary General for Humanitarian Affairs, said the meeting was a conference about people, not about politics.
The conference in Jordan will be, I hope, also about that hope for the future. So it should also speak to the essential requirement for the people of Palestine, for statehood, for a pathway towards it, for them to be able to realize that they will rule themselves in freedom. And in that freedom, we'll find security for Israel and for the other countries in that region. Towards it, for them to be able to realize that they will rule themselves in freedom. And in that freedom, we'll find security for Israel and for the other countries in that region.
And finally, official Pride celebrations in Tel Aviv were called off this year, but many turned out anyway, with the usually exuberant, lighthearted event taking on a decidedly more political tone, with calls for the release of the remaining hostages from Gaza. Well, many artists and participants turned out for the occasion, but the Bring Them Home slogan was very much a key theme. 120 of the 250 hostages taken during Hamas's 7th of October raids remain in Gaza, including some 40 who the military says are dead. And that is where we'll leave it for this edition. Thanks very much for staying with us here on the France 24 Night Watch. See you next time.
Thanks very much for staying with us. Time now for Eye on Africa with me, Georgia Calvin-Smith. Tonight, divisions remain as South Africa's ANC party looks to reconcile with some of its rivals as officials slog through more critical meetings aimed at finding a way forward from last week's election trouncing. Also, for the first time, Zanzibar commemorates the abolition of slavery. The island is part of Tanzania and was a key stopping-off point for Arab slavers across East Africa for hundreds of years. And Somaliland's basketball trailblazers has some pretty clear goals in sight. The Hargeisa girls are the first of a maiden generation of keen female players of the sport in the breakaway territory, at the heart of a sovereignty struggle with Somalia. But first, in South Africa, the MK party said that it is engaging with the ANC's coalition talks. MK...
Transform, bangle earrings, real touch, only natural diamonds, mason jewelry.
Good morning, it is 11 a.m. in Singapore and Hong Kong, 8:30 in New Delhi, and 10 o'clock in Jakarta. I'm Shahida Osman. At this hour, the United Nations condemns escalating violence and civilian attacks that have killed at least 50 people in Myanmar's Rakhine State as an ethnic armed group battles military forces. Deal-making gathering steam in India after Tuesday's election results. Prime Minister Narendra Modi's Bharatiya Janata Party tries to cobble together a coalition to form the new government amid demands from its allies. Plus, a water crisis in India's capital. The Supreme Court orders the release of surplus water to New Delhi amid an intense heatwave and record-breaking temperatures. UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres has voiced deep concerns over the increasing violence in Myanmar. This is after reports said at least 50 people were killed by the military in a raid last week in Rakhine State.
The latest incident targeting ethnic Rakhine in western Myanmar and the ongoing persecution
along border areas with Thailand and Bangladesh. Crucial negotiations underway in India in the wake of Tuesday's election result. Regional parties in the BJP-led alliance are calling for more funds to be allocated to their state, as well as positions in the next cabinet. Their demands come as Prime Minister Narendra Modi and his Bharatiya Janata Party try to cobble together a coalition to form the nation's new government. The BJP lost its absolute majority in parliament in the recently concluded polls. It now finds itself relying on support from allies, mainly from the TDP and JDU, among other smaller parties. Their backing has added 28 seats to the BJP seat count of 240, but that is still shy of the simple majority of 272 seats required to form the government. This is the first time the ruling BJP has lost its majority since coming to power 10 years ago. The Chief Election Commission...
Unemployment has cost them at the election, so that's something that I think they all would like to think about how they can get together to do.
Now, amid the political flurry, the Indian capital is grappling with a water crisis. The country's Supreme Court has directed the state of Himachal Pradesh to release surplus water to Delhi to mitigate the situation. The capital has been grappling with severe water shortage amid an intense heat wave and record-breaking temperatures. The apex court has warned the Delhi government against any wastage while directing the neighboring state of Haryana to ensure smooth flow of water from Himachal Pradesh. Residents in parts of the capital have been relying on tankers for their supply. Rationing is in place, and the government has enforced a fine of around $20 on anyone found wasting water. Last week, the government approached the Supreme Court seeking additional supply, saying severe heat conditions led to an excessive surge in demand and resulted in an extraordinary shortage. Delhi has seen maximum temperatures reaching close to 50 degrees Celsius during the ongoing summer season. But Delhi isn't the only city suffering. According to a study by the Nature Journal, more than 80 metropolitan cities across the world faced water crises over the last 2 decades. It is a problem also in Southeast Asia. Last month, the Koh Phi Phi archipelago off the west coast of southern Thailand, a popular tourist destination, suffered severe water shortage after a blistering heat wave. There has been widespread condemnation over an Israeli attack on a school in Gaza that killed dozens. A UN spokesman called it tragic and horrific, saying there must be accountability.
It is being used by UNRWA to shelter people and provide some basic services. This is just yet another...
Militants, if you've seen 14 children die in that strike, that shows that something went wrong.
The raid occurred as US, Qatari and Egyptian mediators resumed talks in Cairo on a ceasefire. Qatar said Hamas has not yet responded to a 3-phase proposal by US President Joe Biden. G7 and Arab states have backed the plan and urged Hamas to accept the deal, but a senior Hamas official called the proposal just words, adding it has not yet received any written commitments. Meantime, the US has confirmed Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu will address a joint session of Congress on 24th of July. Senate leader Chuck Schumer says the move is intended to show America's ironclad relationship with its longtime ally, even though he has clear and profound disagreements with Mr. Netanyahu. The Israeli leader says he is honored and looks forward to presenting US lawmakers with what he called the truth about the just war. The alarm bells are getting louder over the blocking of revenue to the Palestinians. The United States is warning Israel it faces a massive security threat if the Palestinian Authority collapses. The Israeli military is reportedly also citing the threat of a third intifada, or civil uprising, if funds don't resume. Israel has been blocking revenue to the Palestinians since the Hamas attack exactly 8 months ago. Under interim peace agreements from the 1990s, Israel collects tax revenue for the Palestinian Authority, which governs parts of the West Bank. The revenue makes up 70% of the Palestinian budget. The finance ministry estimates Israel is holding back $1.6 billion. The Palestinian government spokesperson says Israel is imposing a financial siege on the people. Now, with the US already struggling to persuade Israel over military matters, Kate Fisher tells us if there is room for persuasion over financial affairs.
They've told Israel that they risk a huge security meltdown if the Palestinian Authority was to collapse. And it could be more counter to the strategic interests of Israel. Nothing could be more counter to the strategic interests of Israel than the collapse of the Palestinian Authority. But they're struggling to have any influence from a military point of view. And that's been going on for several months. It seems unlikely that they're going to have any effect, therefore, financially as well, despite these grades seem to listen very closely to what Joe Biden has to say and has been forging his own path. And that will be worrying, I think, to the White House.
And your Asia business update is next. Growth in Chinese exports jumped in May more than expected as global demand continues to drive a recovery. And later, Aramco reportedly pricing its stock offering at the bottom end of its targeted range, on track to raise more than $11 billion.
South African President Cyril Ramaphosa met with senior officials of the African National Congress ANC on Thursday to decide how to go about forming a government after the party lost its 30-year grip on power and left a post-election deadlock. The party's National Executive Committee was meeting in Johannesburg to work through a split within the party's rank over which direction to take.
We are expecting a sober discussion and engagement, and based on also experience of other countries in the world who have been in the situation like ours. Never have we envisaged that we will, at national level, not think but be in a situation where we have to talk about coalitions and all of that. So proposals put here are not cast in stone. Members of the NEC, they are not robbers. They are allowed themselves to express themselves.
The ANC has indicated its leaning towards a government of national unity that will bring together many of the political parties in a broad agreement rather than a direct coalition with the main opposition, the Democratic Alliance, or DA.
The majority of South Africans did not vote for those parties that are in the Moonshot Pact or whatever they call themselves. The majority of South Africans voted for progressive parties that advance the interests of the black South African. And these different parties, some of them are I consider them to be offshoots of the DA, where they have been formed in order to garner the black vote for the DA. The people have rejected them.
The ANC has seen a gradual decline in support over the last 20 years as South Africa struggled with high levels of poverty, unemployment and inequality.
Sergei Lavrov landed Wednesday in N'Djamena, Chad, on the last leg of his Africa tour. During his working visit, Russia's foreign minister met with his State counterpart, Abderrahman Kulamallah. On the war in Ukraine, Lavrov told journalists that the West was not concerned about peace. It's not peace that the West would like to preserve. Western principles are as follows. You have to choose. Either you support Russia or you support us. If you choose Russia, we will punish you. That's the Western position. Chad and the Russian Federation will mark this year 60 years of diplomatic ties. Central Africa and Western Africa have been considered as France's sphere of influence for decades. This political analyst believes the security situation in the Sahel region has paved the way for changes. The security issue is a point of entry for Russia in Africa. This enabled the Russian Federation to gain a foothold in the Central African Republic at the time, in Mali afterwards, and other Sahelian countries. The same dynamic can be observed in the DRC. Lavrov's visit follows the visit by Chadian President Mahamat Déby Itno to Russia last January. On Wednesday, Itno met with Russia's top diplomat. According to the presidency, the officials reviewed areas of cooperation that will boost bilateral ties.
The Central Bank of Congo, BCC, has mandated that all electronic payment terminals, EPTs, only accept Congolese francs. This move aims to boost the use of the national currency and reduce reliance on the US dollar, which weakens the franc, according to the central bank. Currently, only 13% of EPTs accept Congolese francs, favoring foreign currencies in the dollarized economy. The central bank's new policy supports previous measures requiring prices and state payments to be in the national currency. Additionally, a switch monetary initiative will integrate all bank cards to streamline transactions regardless of the issuing bank. This policy aims to make dollar transactions more costly than those in francs, encouraging businesses and individuals to use the national currency.
The UN Secretary General called Wednesday for a tax on profits of fossil fuel companies to help pay for the fight against global warming. He spoke from the American Museum of Natural History in New York.
Already this year, a brutal heat wave has baked Asia with record temperatures, shriveling crops, closing schools, and killing people. Cities from New Delhi to Bamako to Mexico City are scorching. Here in the US, savage storms have destroyed communities and lives. We have seen drought disasters declared across Southern Africa, and extreme rains flood the Arabian Peninsula, East Africa, and Brazil.
Antonio Guterres appealed to media and tech companies to stop taking advertising from the fossil fuel industry's biggest players. During his speech on World Environment Day, he also took aim at subsidies paid out in many countries which help keep prices low for consumers.
Climate change is the mother of all stealth taxes paid by everyday people and vulnerable countries and communities. Meanwhile, the godfathers of climate chaos, the fossil fuel industry, rake in record profits, and feast off trillions in taxpayer-funded subsidies.
The UN chief reiterated the need to reduce global emissions of carbon dioxide for the 1.5 degrees Celsius target to be kept alive.
Thank you for watching and privilege of your time. This is Amir Shakil 5858. I am Amir Woodman. Have a good life.